The sun had barely risen over the ridges when the girl first saw him. He stood at the edge of the tree line where the shadow of the mountain reached out like a hand across the valley. She had gone farther than her mother would have wanted, following the sound of the creek and the wildflowers that grew thick in spring. He was there, tall and silent, his figure cut against the rising light, his shoulders marked with the weight of something she could not yet name. She did not know his name then, so in her heart she called him the Man of the Mountain. Life in that part of the country was not easy. Not for women left alone, and not for children who had to grow faster than their years. The land was beautiful, but it was also raw, unyielding, and often cruel. Storms swept down without warning, the soil demanded hard work, and danger always seemed to watch from behind the next bend in the trail. Her mother had taught her to be cautious of strangers, especially those who lived close to the land in ways their kind did not understand. Yet the girl felt no fear when she looked at the tall Apache who seemed to belong to the earth itself. She felt only curiosity, a stirring she could not explain. Her mother did not share that feeling. The Apache was danger. She spoke of raids, of warnings carried by neighbors, of stories whispered late at night when the fire was low. She knew the land was full of people who had lived there long before settlers built their cabins and fenced their fields. And she feared what could happen if those worlds collided. To her, the man who appeared at the edge of the woods was not a guardian spirit, not a figure of quiet strength, but a threat. Her voice was firm when she told her daughter to stay away from him. And yet the daughter's eyes betrayed her, glancing back to the mountains as though some part of her longed to see him again. The seasons had their way of changing things. The summer brought long days and heavy heat, and it was during one of those blazing afternoons that she saw him again. This time, he was closer, watching from the other side of the creek where she gathered water. He did not move, did not speak, only stood as though waiting for something. She thought about running, about calling out, but instead she stayed, frozen by a strange trust she did not fully understand. The water in her bucket rippled, the air hung heavy, and for a heartbeat the world seemed to fall away. Then, as quickly as he had appeared, he was gone, leaving her with questions that had no answers. She tried to tell her mother, but the words came out clumsy, uncertain. Her mother's face hardened, lines of worry pressing deeper. She warned her again, more sternly this time, saying that some men were like storms they did not mean to ruin, but ruin was all they brought. The girl listened, but her thoughts carried her back to the woods, to the man whose silence spoke louder than words. He was not just a figure in the distance anymore. He was a mystery woven into her days, a shadow at the edge of her world. The settlement was small, only a handful of families trying to make a life in a place that demanded more than it gave. Men rode out for work or hunting, leaving women and children to guard the homes. News traveled slow, carried by wagon or word of mouth. Whispers of Apache movements reached their ears now and then, warnings to be cautious, to keep rifles loaded and eyes sharp. Fear was something they lived with, like drought or illness, part of the fabric of frontier life. But fear was also something that could twist a heart, make it see enemies where none existed. The girl's mother carried that fear like armor. Every creak in the night made her reach for the rifle propped against the wall. Every howl of a coyote seemed to her a sign of something worse. She worked hard, harder than most, and every effort was bent on keeping her daughter safe. But the girl began to wonder if safety and living were the same thing. Was there not more to the world than fear and caution? Was there not something to be learned from the people who had walked these lands long before her family arrived? One evening, as the sky turned red and the crickets began their steady song, the girl saw him again. He was closer this time, close enough that she could see the lines on his face, the strength in his eyes. He did not smile, but neither did he frown. He carried himself with a stillness that made the air around him feel different, as though even the wind bent to his presence. She wanted to speak, to ask who he was, why he watched, but her voice caught in her throat. Before she could gather courage, her mother's voice called her back, sharp and urgent, and the moment slipped away. That night, her mother's warnings grew heavier. She spoke of danger, of the need to keep distance, of the cost of trust in a land where trust could kill. Yet the girl could not shake the image of him standing there like a part of the mountain itself. It was as if two truths warred inside her, one born of her mother's caution, the other of her own instinct. She did not know which to believe. Then came the day that would change everything. The sky had grown heavy with storm. the kind that rolls down the mountains with sudden fury. The girl had gone to the creek again, her mother busy with the chores of keeping the small cabins standing strong against the wind. The storm struck fast, rain lashing, water rising quicker than she thought possible. The path she had taken became a river of mud, and before she realized the danger, she was caught in the rushing current, her cries swallowed by the roar of the storm. In that moment, when fear wrapped tight around her chest and she thought the mountain would take her, he appeared. The Apache moved through the storm with a strength that seemed beyond human, his arms cutting through the water as though it bent for him. He reached her, pulled her from the flood, and carried her to higher ground. The rain beat against them both, the wind howled, yet in his grip she felt safety, a kind of safety her mother's warnings had never given. He set her down gently, his eyes locking with hers, and for the first time she saw something there, something more than mystery, more than silence. She saw a promise, though she did not yet know what kind. By the time her mother reached the creek, the storm was breaking, the worst of it passing. She saw her daughter safe, saw the Apache standing there with her, and in that instant the fear in her heart clashed with the sight before her eyes. The man she had called danger had just saved the one thing she lived for. Yet trust is not so easily built, and fear does not vanish in a single moment. The mother raised her rifle, her hands trembling, torn between gratitude and terror. The girl cried out, reaching for her mother's arm, but the storm had left its mark not just on the land but on their lives. And there, with the rain still dripping from the trees, and the mountains holding their silence, the three of them stood, mother, daughter, and the man of the mountain. The air was heavy with tension, with questions unspoken, with choices that could not be undone. What would come next, none of them yet knew, but in that fragile moment, the path of their lives shifted forever. The rain slowed until it was nothing more than a mist hanging in the air, the kind that clung to skin and hair, leaving everything damp and unsettled. The girl's mother stood rigid, her rifle pressed to her shoulder, eyes narrowed and sharp. The Apache did not flinch, did not reach for any weapon. He only stood there, tall and calm, as though the storm itself had chosen him to linger behind. His dark eyes did not move from the mother, yet there was no threat in them. There was strength, yes, but not the kind that reached for blood. The girl could feel the pounding of her heart as she stepped between them, her small hand tugging at her mother's arm. "He saved me," she whispered, her voice trembling not from fear of the man but from fear of what her mother might do. "I would have drowned if not for him." Her mother's jaw tightened. Gratitude and suspicion warred inside her. She wanted to believe her daughter, but the stories she had heard, the warnings that had shaped her every choice, kept her hands steady on the rifle. The Apache tilted his head slightly, rainwater running down the lines of his face, but he said nothing. Silence was his language, and it carried more weight than words could. Finally, the mother lowered the gun, though not all the way. Her voice came sharp. "You stay away from my child." It was not a request, but a command, though she knew, in her heart, she was speaking into a storm she could not control. The Apache's gaze lingered for a moment longer. Then he turned, walking back toward the forest, his steps sure and soundless. The girl watched him go, her chest aching with a feeling she could not name, while her mother pulled her close, whispering fiercely of danger, of never straying so far again. But the mountain had a way of weaving people's paths together. Days passed, the storm gave way to bright skies, and yet the image of him never left the girl's mind. She wondered where he went, what he thought of when he looked at them from the shadows of the trees. She wondered if he had a family hidden somewhere in the mountains, or if he lived alone, bound only to the land. She wondered why he had helped her, why he seemed to appear when danger drew near. Her mother's words echoed in her ears, but her heart kept asking questions her mother would not allow. The settlement had grown uneasy in those weeks. Rumors spread faster than the creek's current rumors of Apache movement in the hills, of cattle driven off, of fences cut. Men rode out at night, their rifles gleaming under the moon, their voices sharp with anger. Neighbors gathered at one another's cabins, speaking in low tones about raids and retaliation, about whether it was safe to keep their families there at all. Fear had a way of spreading like fire, catching on every dry thought and every whispered tale. For the girl's mother, this fear was a weight she carried every waking hour. knew the wilderness was not kind to women and children alone. Her husband had been gone for months, riding out in search of work, promising to return but leaving silence in his place. Each day that passed without word carved another hollow in her heart, another reason to grip the rifle tighter at night. She told herself she could protect her daughter. She had to. But deep inside she knew that life on the edge of the mountains was more fragile than she let on. The girl, though, saw the world differently. She saw the flowers blooming after the storm, the deer that stepped gently through the meadow, the hawks that circled high above the ridges. She saw beauty where her mother saw threats. And in the figure of the Apache, she saw not danger, but something unknown, something that drew her closer instead of pushing her away. To her, he was not the enemy of the stories told by neighbors. He was the man of the mountain, a guardian whose silence was more powerful than the anger of men. One evening, as the sun sank low and the hills burned gold, the girl spotted him again. He stood at the far side of the valley, near the line where pine trees thickened, watching. She did not speak of it to her mother this time. She kept it in her heart, a secret she carried like a stone that weighed but also steadied her. She wondered if he had seen her mother raise the rifle that day, if he thought her ungrateful. She wondered if he knew how many times she had whispered thanks into the quiet, hoping the wind might carry her words to him. Her mother noticed the way her eyes wandered toward the hills. She noticed the silence when her daughter used to chatter about birds and streams. Worry grew sharper in her chest, twisting into frustration. "You are not to look for him," she said one night as they sat by the fire. "Men like that bring trouble. You don't understand the kind of danger he carries with him." "But he saved me," the girl whispered back, her voice softer than the crackling logs. Her mother shook her head. "Sometimes the same hand that pulls you from water can push you into fire." She spoke with finality, as though her words could erase the memory of his strength, his steady eyes. But the girl knew the truth of what she had felt. She knew safety when it wrapped around her, even if it came from the very man her mother feared most. Beyond the cabin walls, the land itself seemed to shift. Neighbors grew restless. Men spoke louder, angrier, planning rides into the hills to drive the Apaches farther away. The girl heard these talks when they visited the trading post, when women whispered behind hands about the dangers of the season. And though she was young, she understood that the line between survival and ruin was as thin as a thread stretched across a canyon. Nights grew heavier. The mother kept the rifle closer than ever, her ears straining at every howl of the wind, every creak of the cabin timbers. She prayed silently for her husband's return, for strong arms to ease the burden she carried alone. But the only figure who appeared near their home was the one she did not want, the Apache, the man who haunted the edges of her world. The girl did not see him often, but when she did, the moments carved themselves deep into her memory. A shadow moving through the trees as she fetched water. A figure at dusk, outlined against the ridge. Once, she thought she caught the sound of a low whistle, so faint it might have been the wind, yet it made her pause and turn. She never felt watched in a way that frightened her. It was different. It was as though he was making sure danger did not reach her before he did. Still, the tension between mother and daughter grew. The mother's warnings sharpened, her voice quick with fear. The daughter's silence deepened, carrying secrets she did not know how to share. And the land itself seemed to hold its breath, as though waiting for the moment when choice and chance would collide. One afternoon, as autumn crept into the air and the leaves turned, a rider arrived at their cabin. He carried news from the next settlement. Trades had been reported in the far valley, barns set aflame, cattle driven off. Men were calling for action, for bands to ride into the hills and push back. The mother listened with her heart pounding, her hand gripping her daughter's shoulder. The rider's voice was sharp, his warnings heavy, and when he left, silence filled the cabin heavier than any storm. The girl sat quietly by the fire that night, her thoughts tangled. She remembered the flood, the strength of the Apache's arms lifting her from death. She remembered the calm in his eyes, the way he walked into the storm without fear. And she wondered, with a chill that made her shiver, if the men in the settlement were preparing to ride against the very man who had saved her life. Her mother sat across the room, staring into the flames, the rifle at her side. She did not speak of it, but the girl knew. War was brewing in the hills, and the choice between fear and trust was tightening around them both. The man of the mountain was no longer just a shadow in the distance. He was a thread in their story, one that could not be cut without unraveling everything. The fire popped, the night deepened, and in the quiet the girl felt the weight of something coming. She could not name it, but she knew their lives stood on the edge of change. Somewhere out there in the darkness, the Apache walked the ridges, and whether he would bring salvation or sorrow, only time would tell. The wind carried a restless sound through the valley that week, like a warning spoken by the mountain itself. The girl felt it in her bones, the unease that settled over the settlement, and even though her mother tried to keep her busy with chores, she knew things were changing. Men gathered at night more often, their voices low but heated, their horses restless under them as they spoke of raids, of cattle vanishing, of barns left smoking. The girl heard bits of it when she lingered near the post, her ears straining. Some men spoke with anger, others with fear, but all spoke with certainty that something had to be done. Her mother's face grew harder with each whisper carried back to her. The rifle never left her side. She had taken to sleeping with it propped against the wall, her hand close to the barrel as if expecting trouble to come through the door at any moment. Da-da. The girl hated the fear that seemed to live in the cabin now. She missed the way her mother used to hum while baking bread, the way the evenings once felt softer. Now, silence filled every corner, broken only by the snap of the fire or the far-off howl of coyotes. What troubled the girl most was knowing that the man of the mountain would soon be caught in the middle of it all. Had saved her. She was certain of that. And she could not believe he was the kind of man the neighbors spoke of when they painted stories of fire and blood. She remembered the steadiness in his eyes, the calm that had wrapped around her even in the fury of the storm. Yet she could not say this aloud. Her mother would not hear it, and the neighbors would not believe it. To them, the Apache was the face of danger itself. One evening, when the sky turned purple with dusk, the girl slipped from the cabin while her mother worked at the hearth. She walked down to the creek, the same one that had nearly taken her life weeks before. The air was cool, the water smooth under the fading light. She waited there, her heart quickening, though she did not know why. And then she saw him, as if the mountain itself had answered her thoughts. He appeared from the tree line, tall and silent, his shadow long in the twilight. He did not approach quickly, but neither did he turn away. They stood across the creek from one another, the sound of water between them. She wanted to speak, to thank him again, but the words tangled in her throat. Instead, she only lifted her hand slightly, a small gesture that carried everything she could not say.
Ow.
For a long moment, he only watched her, his face unreadable. Then, with a slow nod, he turned and disappeared back into the woods. That nod stayed with her as she returned to the cabin, where her mother was waiting with worry written deep into her brow. She said nothing of what she had seen, but her silence was heavy, and her mother felt it. "You've been too quiet," her mother said, her voice soft but strained. "What are you hiding from me?" The girl shook her head, yet guilt pressed into her chest. She wanted to tell her mother that the world was not as simple as danger and safety, enemy and friend, but she did not know how to untangle those truths without breaking the fragile thread between them. Meanwhile, the settlement itself moved toward conflict. Riders came from farther valleys, bringing stories of more attacks, each tale darker than the last. Whether all of them were true or not, no one could say, but truth mattered less than fear. Plans were made to form a band of men to ride into the mountains, to strike first before danger could reach their doors. The girl overheard these plans while fetching flour at the post, her heart sinking with every word. She could see the faces of men she knew, men who had shared meals with her family, hardening into something colder, sharper. That night, she asked her mother if it was right for men to ride against people they did not truly know. Her mother's answer was weary. "Sometimes you don't wait to see if a fire will burn your house. Sometimes you put it out before it reaches your walls." She spoke as though it was the only choice. The girl lay awake long after, staring at the ceiling, wondering if putting out one fire only meant lighting another somewhere else. The man of the mountain was not the only mystery in those days. There were others too, smaller threads woven through their lives that added to the unease. A neighbor's son had gone missing for 2 days, only to return with tales of being watched in the woods. A wagon carrying supplies was found abandoned near the ridge, its goods gone, though no tracks marked where the thieves had gone. Each story added to the weight pressing on the settlement, until even laughter seemed rare. For the girl, every sound from the forest carried double meaning. A crack of a branch might be a deer, or it might be him keeping his silent watch. She did not know if he came because he cared, or because he was bound by some reason she could not guess. All she knew was that he was there, and that his presence stirred both comfort and fear, depending on who spoke of him. Her mother's worry grew sharper. She noticed the way her daughter's eyes wandered toward the hills, the way her hands stilled when someone spoke of Apaches. It is. One evening after supper, she spoke more firmly than before. Must not think of him as anything but danger. He saved you, yes, but that does not mean he will again. Remember that storms come once in kindness and then return in fury. The girl nodded, but her heart whispered otherwise. As the days shortened and the air grew cooler, the men prepared for their ride into the mountains. Horses were shod, rifles cleaned, supplies gathered. The settlement buzzed with tension. Every gesture hurried, every glance edged with unease. The girl listened to their talk with dread, knowing that somewhere in the paths they would ride, the man of the mountain lived. She wondered if he knew what was coming, if he had seen the men gathering like storm clouds. She thought of warning him, but the thought itself filled her with fear. To seek him out would mean betraying her mother's trust, risking being caught between two worlds that already stood on the edge of war. Yet doing nothing felt like a betrayal too, a silence that could cost lives. She carried this weight alone, her heart tugged in both directions. One morning, before dawn, she rose and looked out the window toward the ridges. The mist clung low, the trees dark against the rising light. Somewhere out there, she knew, he was moving. Whether he was preparing for danger or simply living as he always had, she did not know. But she felt that soon their lives would collide again, not in quiet rescue by the creek, but in something larger, something that could not be undone. Her mother stirred awake, reaching for the rifle even before her eyes were fully open. It had become second nature, the way fear had woven itself into her every move. The girl watched her, wondering if fear itself had already stolen more from them than any raid or storm could. She wanted to speak, to tell her mother that not all storms came to destroy, but the words stayed trapped in her chest. By midday, the sound of hooves thundered through the settlement. The men were ready. Families stood outside their cabins, watching as the riders gathered. Dust rose, voices carried, and the air was thick with the promise of violence. The girl clutched her mother's hand, her eyes searching the ridges as though she might see him watching. Somewhere she felt certain, he knew. The riders set off, their figures fading into the hills. Silence returned, but it was a silence heavy with dread. The girl's mother kept her close, her eyes never leaving the mountains, and the girl, her heart caught between two worlds, knew the path ahead would bring choices neither of them were ready for. The mountain held its breath, waiting. So did they. The hills swallowed the riders as they disappeared into the distance, their rifles slung across their backs, their faces set with grim purpose. Dust hung in the air long after they were gone, settling over the cabins like a veil. The girl stood in the yard with her mother, her hand clutched so tightly it almost hurt. Neither spoke. The silence was heavier than any storm. She thought of the Apache, somewhere out there in the mountains, unaware of the force now moving against him, or perhaps he knew. Perhaps he was already watching from the ridges, counting the men, waiting for what would come. The women and children left behind tried to go about their work, but fear followed every step. Chores were done quickly, voices hushed, eyes darting to the tree line as though danger might appear at any moment. The girl felt the weight of it pressing on her chest, the knowledge that something was coming closer with each passing hour. Her mother carried the rifle wherever she went, even when gathering water, even when tending the small garden. She was prepared to fight if she had to, though the thought of it left her looking older, more worn, as though fear had carved new lines into her face. The girl could not rest. At night, she tossed in her bed, listening to the sounds of the forest pressing in around their cabin. Every creak of wood, every rustle of branches made her wonder if he was out there. Sometimes she thought she could feel his presence, as though the man of the mountain kept a silent watch even when she could not see him. She longed to know what he thought of all this, if he was preparing to strike back, or if he had some plan of his own. But he remained a mystery, a shadow on the ridges, his silence louder than any words. Days passed without news of the riders. Whispers began to grow among the women. Some said the men had found nothing but empty trails, others said they had driven off small bands, and would return soon. Dot. But there were darker rumors, too, that ambushes had taken place, that blood had been spilled in the canyons. No one knew for sure, and the uncertainty gnawed at everyone. The girl felt it most of all, because in her heart she carried a secret no one else did. She did not want harm to come to the Apache, the man who had saved her, and yet she could not admit it aloud, not even to her mother. One evening, when the sky was painted with streaks of red and gold, the girl caught sight of movement near the creek. Her breath caught. It was him. He stood in the shadows of the trees, his figure still and watchful. She felt the urge to run to him, to warn him of the riders, but fear routed her feet to the ground. Instead, she stepped forward just enough so he could see her. For a long moment their eyes met across the distance. No words were spoken, but something passed between them, a thread of understanding that bound them tighter than before. Then he vanished back into the woods, leaving her heart racing. Her mother noticed the faraway look in her eyes that night and grew uneasy. She did not press, but the suspicion lingered between them. The girl could feel it like a wall, her mother's fear standing between them, blocking the truth she longed to share. As she wanted to say that the Apache was not the danger her mother thought, that he was different. But her mother's voice had always been clear. There could be no trust in such a man. To speak against that would be like striking flint to tinder. The next morning, news came. A wounded rider staggered back into the settlement, his horse lathered, his face pale. He spoke of a skirmish deep in the canyons, of arrows in the dark, of men falling one by one. His words carried fear like smoke, and the settlement braced for the worst. The girl listened from the edge of the crowd, her stomach twisting. She wanted to know if the Apache had been there, if he had fought, if he had survived. But she dared not ask. The tension grew heavier. Neighbors spoke of fortifying the cabins, of keeping children close, of posting guards at night. The girl's mother doubled her watch, keeping her daughter within reach at all times. But the girl's thoughts were restless. She dreamed of the Apache walking alone through the mountains, his face calm, his eyes steady, even as war pressed in around him. She dreamed of the moment by the creek when he had saved her, and of the unspoken bond that still lingered. A few nights later, she woke to the sound of movement outside. The moonlight spilled through the cracks of the cabin, and she slipped quietly from her bed. Her mother slept lightly, the rifle by her side, but did not stir as the girl crept to the window. Her breath caught as she saw him standing just beyond the yard. His figure was tall, motionless, his gaze fixed on the cabin. For a moment, fear and comfort warred in her chest. Then he lifted a hand slightly, a gesture that seemed like both a warning and a promise, before melting back into the shadows. The girl lay awake the rest of the night, torn by what she had seen. She knew he was near, that he had chosen to show himself to her and not to her mother. She knew that trust was dangerous, but she also knew that danger was already surrounding them. She felt caught between two worlds, the world of her mother, built on fear and protection, and the world of the mountain, built on silence and strength. The following day, more riders returned, weary and grim. Their faces were marked by exhaustion, their voices low as they spoke of what had happened in the canyons. Some claimed victory, saying they had driven off bands of Apaches. Others said it was only the beginning, that the fight had just begun. The girl listened to their words and felt a storm rising inside her. She wondered if the man of the mountain had been among those they spoke of, if he had been forced to raise his hand against the very people who now threatened his life. The mother grew more anxious. She sensed her daughter's wandering thoughts, the way her eyes searched the ridges, the way she lingered at the creek. One evening she spoke sharply. "You must not let your mind wander to him. He is not for us, and he never will be. Promise me, you will stay away." The girl lowered her eyes, her throat tight. She could not promise, not when the truth of her heart was already bound to him. The days that followed stretched like a rope pulled taut. The settlement waited for the next move, uncertain if it would come from the mountains or from their own men. Every sound in the night felt louder, every shadow deeper. The girl felt the weight of it pressing closer, the sense that something was about to break. One evening, as the sun dipped low, a messenger rode hard into the settlement. His horse was near collapse, his face pale with fear. He spoke of signs in the hills, of fires lit in the distance, of movement that could only mean one thing. The Apache were gathering. Panic spread quickly, voices rising, children crying, women clutching their families' clothes. The men who had returned prepared once more, their weapons ready, their tempers hot. The girl stood in the yard, her heart hammering. She looked to the ridges, half expecting to see him there. The sky was painted with streaks of fire as the sun sank, and she felt as though the mountain itself was holding its breath. Her mother pulled her inside, bolting the door, setting the rifle within reach. But the girl could not shake the feeling that the man of the mountain was near, watching, waiting for the moment when everything would change. The cabin walls seemed too small, the silence too heavy. Outside, the settlement braced for what was coming, and inside, the girl felt the storm building in her chest. She did not know if the Apache would come in anger or in defense, if he would appear as savior or as the danger her mother always feared. She only knew that the time of waiting was nearly over. As the night fell, the sound of drums echoed faintly from the ridges, carried by the wind. It was distant, yet it made the air thick with tension. The girl's mother tightened her grip on the rifle, her face pale but fierce. The girl pressed her hand to her chest, whispering silently into the dark, hoping that the one who had saved her before would not be lost in the storm about to break. And in that moment, with the drums pulsing like the heartbeat of the mountain, the story balanced on a knife's edge, waiting for the clash that would decide everything. The night was alive with tension, the sound of distant drums carrying across the ridges like the heartbeat of the mountain itself. The girl lay awake, staring at the cabin ceiling, her small hand clenched into a fist beneath the blanket. Her mother sat near the fire, her rifle across her lap, eyes fixed on the door, as though expecting it to burst open at any moment. Outside, the settlement stirred in fits and starts, dogs barking, voices rising, then falling quiet again. No one truly slept. Everyone waited for what would come. At some point near midnight, the drums stopped. The silence that followed was heavier than any sound. The girl's breath caught, her heart pounding. She had the strange sense that the world was holding still, bracing itself. Her mother noticed it too, her fingers tightening on the rifle stock. Hours stretched slow, each minute dragging, until at last, the first light of dawn crept over the valley. Nothing had come in the night, yet the fear remained, clinging to them like morning mist. The men gathered at sunrise, readying themselves for a fight they believed was certain. They spoke of riding out to meet whatever force was gathering in the hills, their voices sharp with anger and pride. But not everyone agreed. Some of the older men who had lost more than once in their lives, warned against rushing into the mountains without knowing the truth. Arguments flared, splitting neighbors who had once shared bread and work. Suspicion ran high, and trust ran low. The girl stayed near the edge of it all, listening, her eyes always drawn to the ridges. She wondered if he was up there, the man of the mountain, watching the same sunrise, listening to the same voices. She remembered the feel of his arms lifting her from the flood, the calm in his eyes as he set her down safe. He was not the monster the men spoke of. She knew it. But how could she convince anyone else? Her mother's warnings rang in her ears, but her heart clung to a different truth. By midday, riders returned from scouting the hills. They had seen movement, yes, but not armies, not raiders gathering for war. Just small groups, families perhaps, shifting camps higher into the mountains as the season turned. It was enough to stoke the men's anger further. They are preparing for something, one spat. You don't light fires on ridges unless you mean to send a message. Others nodded, their fists tightening around their reins. The decision was made, they would strike before the Apache struck them. That night, the girl could not bear the weight of silence anymore. While her mother slept, exhausted by fear, the girl slipped from the cabin. The moon hung low, lighting the path to the creek. She walked quickly, her breath trembling, until she reached the place where she had seen him before. And there he was, as though he had been waiting. He stepped from the shadows, tall and steady, his presence filling the clearing. For a long moment neither spoke, and the girl whispered, her voice breaking, "They are coming for you. The men. They ride tomorrow." Her words carried all the fear she had held inside. He did not flinch, did not look away. Instead, he lifted his gaze to the mountains, his face calm, as though this was a truth he already knew. The girl felt tears sting her eyes. "Please, I don't want them to hurt you. You saved me." "Why do they call you Danger when you're not?" She waited, hoping he might finally speak, but his silence was unbroken. Yet in that silence she understood. He was not a man of words. He lived in the space between them, in the choices he made, in the strength he carried without needing to name it. Slowly he placed a hand over his chest, then extended it outward, toward her, a gesture that spoke of promise, of protection. She nodded, though she did not fully understand. She wanted to beg him to leave, to vanish deeper into the mountains where the riders could not find him. But something in his eyes told her that leaving was not his way. He would face what came, not as an enemy, but as a man who belonged to the mountain itself. The next day dawned with a storm brewing in the sky. Clouds rolled heavy over the ridges, thunder muttering in the distance. The men prepared to ride, their faces set, their weapons ready. The women stood with children clutched close, their eyes wide with worry. The girl's mother gripped her hand, pulling her close. "Stay inside," she said firmly, her voice trembling beneath the steel. But the girl could not stay inside. She slipped away again, running toward the ridge where the riders would pass. She climbed the slope, her lungs burning, until she reached a place where she could see both the valley below and the forest beyond. And there she saw him. The Apache stood on the high ground, his figure dark against the storm clouds. He did not carry fire. He did not call others to him. He stood alone, as though the mountain itself had raised him to face what was coming. The riders thundered into view, their horses pounding the earth, their shouts rising. The girl's heart hammered in her chest. She wanted to cry out to stop them, but her voice stuck in her throat. She watched, frozen, as the moment she had feared drew close. The storm broke then, rain lashing down, thunder cracking. The riders faltered in the sudden fury of weather, their lines breaking as the ground turned slick beneath them. Lightning lit the sky, and for an instant it illuminated everything the riders. The storm and the Apache standing tall above them. The men saw him then. Shouts rose, rifles lifted. But before the first shot rang, the girl cried out, her voice breaking through the storm, "Stop! He is not your enemy." Her scream echoed across the ridge, carrying further than she thought possible. The riders hesitated, their eyes turning toward her. Her mother was there a moment later, stumbling through the rain, her face pale with terror. She grabbed her daughter, pulling her close, her own voice hoarse with fear. "What have you done?" she cried. But the girl only clung to her, sobbing, her words tumbling out. "He saved me. He is not danger. He is the man of the mountain." For a long, breathless moment, time seemed to stop. The riders, the storm, the figure on the ridge, all of it held in fragile balance. The mother looked up then, her eyes locking with the Apache's, and in that instant she remembered the day of the flood. The sight of him carrying her daughter safe from the raging waters. Gratitude and fear twisted inside her, but for the first time she let herself see him not as a story told in whispers, but as a man who had chosen to save instead of destroy. The storm raged on, rain pouring, thunder shaking the sky. The riders lowered their rifles slowly, uncertainty breaking the fire in their eyes. The Apache did not move, did not strike. He only stood, letting the mountain's fury speak for him. Then, as quietly as he had come, he turned and walked back into the forest, vanishing into the mist and trees. The men muttered, restless, but none gave chase. The storm made fools of them all, their fire drowned by rain. At last they turned back toward the settlement, their anger dulled, their voices low. The girl's mother held her daughter close, her face wet with both rain and tears. "You don't know what you've done," she whispered. But the girl only shook her head. "Yes, I do. He is not danger. He's protector." In the days that followed, the talk of war faded. The storm had broken more than the earth that day it had broken the fire in the riders' hearts. Rumors still spread, fear still lingered, but no one rode into the mountains again. The Apache was not seen often, but sometimes. From the cabin door, the girl thought she glimpsed him at the edge of the trees, standing watch. She never spoke of it aloud. She kept it in her heart, a secret and a promise. Her mother never fully trusted him, but she no longer called him danger. Instead, she chose silence, a silence that admitted more than words could. She still held the rifle close, still carried fear. But in her eyes there was also the weight of something else, understanding, however fragile. As for the girl, she carried the memory of him always. To her, he was not just the man of the mountain, but a symbol of strength and mystery, of a world larger than fear. She grew to see that life on the edge of the frontier was not just about survival, but about learning when to hold on and when to trust. The mountain kept its silence, the creek ran steady, and the seasons turned. The story of that storm, of the night when the riders paused and a girl's voice cut through fear, was whispered in the settlement for years. Some called it foolishness, others called it fate. But for the girl and her mother, it was the day everything changed. The man of the mountain remained a mystery, yet his presence lingered like the echo of thunder across the ridges. And though he walked back into the forest, the girl knew she would never forget the way he had stood, unshaken, as storm and man alike threatened to break the world apart. It was the memory of him that taught her that strength was not always in the rifle or the shout, but in the silence of a man who chose to save instead of destroy. And so their story ended not with fire or blood, but with rain washing the valley clean, leaving behind a fragile peace. The girl carried that peace with her, knowing the man of the mountain would always be more than danger. He would be a reminder of the truth her heart had known all along,